Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello. So we have now looked at some approaches that can be used to develop sustainable solutions or target sustainable development. We have looked at the principles of green chemistry and principles of green engineering in some detail. In this video, I will talk about a very exciting concept of biomimicry. So first I'll explain the concept and I'll show you several examples of how biomimicry has been adapted to solve engineering design problems. Let me start with a very simple example as a motivation. So this is a honeycomb design shown in the picture, and this is very familiar to all of us. So this is the structure that is built by honeybees in order to live and store honey. And you will see that this honeycomb, in this honeycomb, every cell is hexagonal in nature or hexagonal in shape. So every cell you will see has six sides. It's a hexagon. So the question is there a particular reason for this to be a hexagon and not any other shape like square, circle or triangle? Why is it that honeybees over millions of years have developed this specific design? So is there a particular reason for it? And it so happens that there is a very particular reason for this peculiar shape. And the reason is that if you want to divide a particular area into different cells and you want to do that by having least perimeter, then the way to do that is to divide the area into regular hexagons. So what this means is, if I have this particular area and if I want to divide this into a particular number of cells, and at the same time if I want to minimize the perimeter of these boundaries, then hexagon is the best way of doing it, which will minimize the perimeter. Now why is this important for honeycomb design? You will realize that honeybees have to actually construct these honeycombs. So the construction of these walls, these are essentially walls between different cells. The construction of these walls will obviously require some work. Now, when we say that the perimeter is least, that means the amount of effort that is required to build the honeycomb is going to be minimum. So this is an example of how nature has already optimized several things. If you see around, there might be several such examples where nature has already figured out what is the best way of doing things. Interestingly, in this particular case, it was only in early this century that this thing was mathematically proven by Thomas Hales. So we only now very recently have realized it, but nature has known it for thousands of years. So this is a very simple motivating example that I'm giving to talk about the concept of biomimicry. Now, what are the features of designs and processes that you see in nature? If you see anything that happens in nature without any human intervention or technological intervention, you will see that there are two key features in anything that happens in nature. First is that nature solves its problems using methods that do not require high temperature, high pressure and chemical treatments. So whatever process is happening, whether it is degradation of a particular material or whether it's manufacturing of a particular material, production of a particular material, that happens at ambient conditions. So ambient temperatures, ambient pressures and so on. And there are no harsh chemicals. So most of the processes in nature are biological in nature. That means there are no harsh chemicals involved in the process. Second thing is, nature solves problems with locally available resources without generating unusable waste. So whatever, as the statement says, whatever resource is required, it is locally available. There is no elaborate supply chain or no elaborate inventory that is developed. Now, having gone through the course and having looked at the reasons for unsustainability and so on, you will realize that these are very desirable features. a lot of problems in manufacturing or chemical processing happen because we want to achieve high temperature, high pressure. Some of the chemicals that we use are extremely hazardous. We don't know how to manage the waste that is generated and so on. So these features of natural processes are extremely desirable, and the concept of biomimicry is based on that. So this is a statement made by Janine Benyus. She's the person who is behind this Biomimicry Institute. I will show the website later in the lecture. So the statement says that when you look at what is truly sustainable, the only real model that has worked over long periods of time is the natural world. So if you look at natural world, it has been around for millions of years. So for some reason it works. So maybe it is already sustainable, and maybe it's just a matter of the only thing we have to do is adapt those natural practices. So the basic idea in biomimicry is to use nature as a design inspiration to solve sustainability related problems, human problems or technological problems. Now, in order to reinforce this, let me show you a small video from the Biomimicry Institute website. I will show the website later, but this is a very small video which further explains the concept of biomimicry.
Biomimicry is innovation inspired by nature. It's the process of looking at something like a leaf and trying to figure out how to make a better solar cell. It's become popular in the design disciplines, mainly I think because people are looking for more sustainable ways to do things. And organisms know how to do this. After 3.8 billion years, life has learned what works and what's appropriate on the planet. And right now, that's what the people trying to redesign our world are looking for. What we do in biomimicry is we bring in biologists to the design table. We look at how does nature contain liquids? How does nature repel water? So for instance, go outside, look at any leaf and the veins in a leaf, and what you're seeing is the world's best water distribution network. There's an amazing thing called the Murray's Law that says that all branching structures in the natural world, including our lungs, they all follow a single mathematical formula. And it has to do with the pipe branches, and it drops down to a smaller diameter, and then it branches again, and that drops down to a smaller diameter, and that's predictable. People in green building now are starting to say, well, maybe our 90-degree angles that we have in plumbing are really friction devices. Maybe we should distribute electricity differently in a building, water differently in a building, even gases, even air conditioning differently in a building by mimicking this Murray's Law in our plumbing. The most important thing that people should know is that a sustainable world already exists. We're just now beginning to open our eyes and realize that the answers to the questions we've been asking, how do we live here sustainably, are all around us.
So I would again like to acknowledge that this video has been taken from the Biomimicry Institute website. That's the citation part. So that video sort of explained what I have previously mentioned in this video also, that biomimicry is about taking nature as design inspiration and adapting that to solve human problems. So as a concept, it is a fairly straightforward thing to understand. I don't think there is anything very difficult to understand conceptually. So what I will do now is I will give you several examples to illustrate how biomimicry has been practiced in the past. So most of these examples have been taken from the Biomimicry Institute website, but I will pick up selected examples from different domains and explain how what was the original problem and how biomimicry concept was used. So I will start with the first example of humpbacked whales. So the story behind this is that humpbacked whales, if you have seen one or if you know about humpbacked whales, these are large creatures. They are very huge in terms of size, mass, and all those things. So these are large mammals, but they are extremely agile and they are able to change their direction of swimming very quickly. So people who are observing the humpbacked whales were not sure why that is the case. So how come they are so large in size, but yet they are able to move around so quickly? So this curiosity led them to investigate a little further, and what they found was that this ability to move around quickly and change directions quickly was mainly due to flippers. So just to explain further, this what you see here in this picture is a flipper of a humpbacked whale. So it's because of the flippers, and more specifically because of this particular feature of the flippers. So you will see that the leading edge of these flippers is not a smooth edge. It has a lot of irregularities or bumps, and these are known as tubercles. So what scientists hypothesized and what they thought was that it was because of these flippers and these tubercles that these humpbacked whales are able to move around so quickly and change directions so quickly. So this is another figure explaining the same. So this is a flipper. This is a more zoomed up version or better image of a flipper showing these irregularities. And the person who started investigating this was a biologist by the name of Frank Fish. So he's the person who sort of got into this topic. And eventually the detailed analysis of this particular hypothesis was done, and wind tunnel tests were performed on model humpback flippers with and without these leading edge tubercles. So what if you have a smooth leading edge, and what if you have these bumps or tubercles on this leading edge? So both cases the wind tunnel experiments were done, and what was found that if you have these tubercles, it leads to 32% reduction in drag, 8% improvement in lift, and 40% increase in angle of attack. So if you look at these differences from fluid mechanics perspective, you will realize that these are very desirable when it comes to moving in a fluid. So the next extension was, can we actually adapt this concept for an engineering design or something that we have to deal with in engineering or technological domain? So if it's possible, pause this video and think about which areas something like this could be useful. So one area where this kind of these properties or these benefits would be desirable is when you have moving parts. So some common answers that I get are airplanes or fighter jets which move at very high speed and which we have to change directions very quickly. Yes, that could certainly be a possibility, but there are more simpler day-to-day the equipments that we use on a daily basis where something like this could be used. And there is a company called Whale Power Corporation which is using this tubercell technology to improve the efficiency of fans, compressor, pumps and turbines. So all these equipments, fans, compressors, pumps and turbines, have moving parts. So you have blades moving in fluid to either pump the fluid or pressurize the fluid. And in many cases, especially in equipments like compressors, these are very energy intensive equipments. So if you are able to reduce the energy consumption, that is first of all, it's going to reduce the cost. Secondly, it is also going to reduce your energy consumption, which is better from an environmental standpoint. So this company has adopted this tubercell technology, and this is a picture taken from their website. You will see that there are these leading edges which have bumps and which give you better fluid properties or better mechanics. The second example that I am taking is related to architecture or building construction. The natural parallel or the example from nature that was the inspiration for this design architectural design modification was the microtermite molds. So this is a picture of microtermite mold. This is very common in African continent. So you'll see that this is a fairly large structure above ground, and there is some structure below ground as well where the termites live. And the interesting fact that scientists found was that even though the outside temperature varies significantly, so in Africa, in many cases, in many regions, the temperatures vary significantly because it is desert or semi-arid region. So you may have temperature that varies between 35 to 104 degree Fahrenheit, but the temperature inside the mold always remained fairly constant at around 87 degrees Fahrenheit. So was something very curious, because there is obviously no air conditioning, no artificial means of keeping the temperature stable. So there must be some natural way that heat is either dissipated or trapped so that the temperature remains constant. So this example is actually being investigated quite extensively. And one of the ways you can actually do this is to develop, first of all, understand what is inside, and then develop CFD models to understand how the air flows and so on. What I've shown here in this picture are, you can see some internal structure of the termite mold. So this is the complete termite mold. This is a particular region where the surface is broken, and you can see the internal structure. So the reason that this particular temperature can be maintained is because of the natural air flows. So you will see that there are these tubes. So these are essentially channels that run across the height of the mold. And the current hypothesis, based on the CFD studies that have been done, and all of this has been published in, some of these studies have been published in academic literature. The hypothesis currently is that because of the channels that exist along the height of the mold, the air is able to circulate. So you know that the property of the air is that as air becomes hot, it becomes lighter and it goes up. So something like that happens, and as a result the temperature is constantly maintained. You will also see that there are these uh, fins, or you can say that these baffles kind of a structure, which also increases the surface area, and that's also further aids in ensuring that the temperature or heat is dissipated fairly quickly. So these are some of the reasons why this mold can maintain the temperature. And if you are interested in additional information about these examples, there is detailed documentation available on the Biomimicry Institute website, including the CFD studies that I have mentioned. So if you want to know a little bit more or really understand how these things work, I would recommend you to look at those examples in detail and the documents in detail. Now, how this can be adapted, or why this is relevant? This is, as I said, this is relevant in architecture or building construction. Buildings are actually major sources of energy consumption. Increasingly, as we have more air conditioning and more centralized heating and cooling, the quantity of the amount of energy that we need in buildings is increasing rapidly. And if you are able to reduce that, that will make a significant contribution in reducing, let's say, the global warming potential and so on. So one particular example that has adopted this philosophy of, or the design of micro termite mold, is a building in Harare, Zimbabwe. This building is known as Eastgate Center. You can see that this is not like a typical building that you see. It has these holes on its outer facade, and the idea is to develop this kind of a cross flow. The design is made such that we have this cross flow or the flow, natural flow of air, and which maintains the temperature, or which to a certain extent. Of course, when you are designing a building, you cannot exactly copy this design, because that will not be practically feasible. When you are building something, you have certain other requirements as well, like structural strength, usable space, safety, security. All those things will obviously play a role. So this building will not have temperature of 87 degrees Fahrenheit all the time. But because of these modifications, it will be able to at least reduce some of the energy requirement, and that is obviously a good contribution. Any reduction in energy requirements of heating and cooling will make a positive contributions towards the sustainability of the building. The third example is coming from a chemical domain, and this relates to uh, glue. So this relates specifically industrial glue. So if you look at any construction activity, there is a lot of wood involved, and wood, in order to put wood together or stick them together, multiple pieces of wood, glue is often used. And most of the glue that is produced, which is used in construction industry, uses formaldehyde. Now, formaldehyde is a very dangerous chemical. Formaldehyde is known to be carcinogenic, and there are a lot of other harmful effects. So this particular example that I'll show is the design inspiration is blue mussels, and it is used to solve a problem related to industrial glue containing formaldehyde. So particular individual or the scientist who worked on this, this name is given here, is Dr. Lee. He is a faculty in Oregon State University, or he was a faculty in Oregon State University when this was developed. And the story goes that he actually visited the Pacific coast of the US, and he was just taking a walk along the shore. And as he was walking, he saw these blue mussels that were sticking to the rocks along the shore. Now the feature of these blue mussels is that they stick to the rock very firmly. It's not very easy to remove them. Now what he thought was that if you look at it, if you look at the environment from a sticking standpoint, it's a very undesirable or unfavorable environment, because you have a rough surface. So rock surfaces are not very smooth, they are rough surfaces. You have waves that are constantly hitting the rocks. The salt water is salty. So from stickability standpoint, this is a very rough environment, and still blue mussels are able to stick to the rock surface very firmly. So the question is, what is the reason for this? So he started investigating it further, and the connection that he made was about this wood adhesive that I have already discussed. So he figured out that there is something in blue mussels that allows it to stick to rock surface very well. Can we use that for our adhesive requirements? And the particular application he had in mind was the formaldehyde based glue for wood composite. So it uses urea formaldehyde or phenol formaldehyde resins, and formaldehyde vapors are irritant to eyes, skin, nose and throat. There are health and toxicity concerns. Formaldehyde is human carcinogen, and formaldehyde based resins are created using fossil fuels. So those who are either manufacturing the glue or those who are using the glue are constantly exposed to formaldehyde, and therefore it's not good for their health. So he wanted to find out what is it in the blue mussels that allows it to stick to the surface. And after investigating in the lab, he found out that there is a particular marine adhesive protein which is 3,4-dihydroxyphenylalanyl, or DOPA as it is called, amino acid. So this particular amino acid allows blue mussels to stick to the surface. Particularly a particular function, a specific functional group allows it to do this very well. So once he figured out that this is the reason blue mussels are able to stick, then the obvious extension is to use this particular amino acid or protein in glue. But if we think about it, if we use exactly the same amino acid or same protein in glue, then we have to recover that much protein or amino acid from blue mussels, and that is not a good thing, because blue mussels are living animals, and in order to recover the protein you will have to harvest a lot of blue mussels, kill them and so on. So which is not a very ethical thing to do, and you, in order to solve one problem, you might be creating another problem. So that is not desirable. So he started looking at alternatives, and what he found was that soy protein, so soybean is an agricultural product, it's a protein rich product. So soy protein also has similar properties. It is not exactly the same as blue mussels, but it has similar properties. But what is the comparison compared to between marine adhesive protein and soy protein? So marine adhesive protein is expensive, soy protein comparatively is inexpensive. Marine adhesive protein is not readily available. As I said, you'll have to harvest blue mussels and so on. Soy protein, on the other hand, is readily available because soybean farming is well established, and soybean is an agricultural commodity. There is a lot of production of soybean globally. As far as the performance is concerned, obviously the marine adhesive protein is better. So compared to that, soy protein has lesser features, or less, or the it's not as strong in terms of adhesive properties, uh, but it has these features that are very desirable, and therefore he then he decided to go ahead with soy protein, and based on the soy protein he created a glue, and the the adhesive is now being marketed under a particular brand name. And so you have looked at some natural problem, you figured out that there is a requirement for that kind of a property in something that we do, but you cannot actually copy it directly, you have to adapt it, you have to mimic it, and that's why we say it is biomimicry. So formaldehyde based protein has low cost, but it's petroleum based, it is toxicity concerns, and compared to that you have this um, particular product that they have developed. It is low cost, it is soy based, so it's renewable, it has high strength, water resistant, non-toxic, and they estimated that replacement of 47 million pounds of conventional resin will lead to about 50 to 90% reduction in emission of hazardous air pollutant. So there is a significant benefit. The fourth example is related to transport, and particularly bullet trains specifically. So you might have seen this picture of bullet train in the past, and the bullet trains have this very peculiar shape, which is a very elongated nose. So the question is, why do bullet trains have this very peculiar shape? What is the reason? So one obvious answer that you would have thought of is the whole concept of boundary layer separation and fluid mechanics and so on. So if you have a tapering shape, it helps in achieving higher speeds or reducing the drag, because boundary layer separation happens later. Now that is obviously a good thing, but the main reason for this particular design was actually not um, just to increase the speed. The main reason was a particular problem that the bullet train operators were facing. So bullet train obviously run at very high speed, and the tracks that were developed for the bullet trains had a lot of tunnels. So and what the observation was that every time the bullet train either enters the tunnel or leaves the tunnel, it generates a lot of vibrations and noise. So there was a lot of turbulence generated, and because of that there was a lot of vibration and noise. So the bullet train manufacturers and the related people started to investigate why is that the case and how can we solve it. So the particular individual who eventually came up with the problem was an engineer known as Eiji Nakatsu. Uh, Again, the details are on the biomimicry website, but he took design inspiration from kingfisher bird. So if you have seen the picture of a kingfisher, the kingfisher has a very peculiar beak. So that beak is pointed, and it almost looks like this particular this nose of a bullet train. And the reason he got interested in kingfisher was that kingfishers, birds fly on water and they catch fish in water. But what this person observed was that whenever the kingfishers actually when they jump in water, when they put their beak in water to catch the fish, there is very little disturbance generated. So water doesn't get disturbed very much. Now what is happening when the kingfisher is putting beak in water is that the beak is going from one fluid, air, to another fluid, which is water. So it is actually going from almost, we can say, one medium to another medium, but there is practically no disturbance that is generated in the water. And what he thought was maybe that is what is happening in bullet trains. So at very high speed it is going, when it's entering the tunnel, the atmosphere inside the tunnel is slightly different. Maybe the temperature, humidity, air pressure, these are different as compared to what is outside. And because of that change in medium, the vibrations, turbulence and noise is created. So he adapted the design of the kingfisher beak and used it to redesign the nose of a bullet train. So obviously it gives you some advantage in terms of speed also, but the main reason for this peculiar shape of the nose is because they wanted to avoid the disturbance that is generated and a noise that is generated when the bullet train enters or leaves the tunnel. So there are more details available on this website that is mentioned at the bottom. There is also a very interesting explanation about the pantograph design, how it is based on biomimicry, but I'll let you explore that on your own. The final couple of examples I will cover very shortly. The one is related to Portland cement. So cement is something that we used a lot in recent times because there is a lot of construction going on globally, and almost all that construction requires cement. So the production of cement is extremely high. And cement, unfortunately, Portland cement is not, the production of Portland cement is very energy and carbon intensive. So some estimates in general show that the CO2 emission or the global warming potential of production of 1 kg of cement is about 1 kg of CO2 equivalent. So you can see that the quantity of cement that we are producing, how much CO2 is being generated, and the cement production is going to increase further. So the interest here, the nature, the example from nature which is being investigated to solve this problem is that of coral reefs. Now coral reefs these are at the bottom of the sea or the seabed, and these are basically cement-like structures. But the interesting thing is these structures are developed by using the CO2 that is there in seawater. So you have atmosphere through which CO2 gets into seawater. So seawater will always have some carbon dioxide, and these coral reefs actually use that carbon dioxide to construct these coral reefs, these cement-like structures. So this actually has double benefits, because you are not only eliminating CO2 generation, but you are actually using CO2 to produce something that we need. So it is almost like you are actually doing CO2 sequestration. So there is a double benefit if you are able to figure out how to copy what coral reefs are doing and produce a material like cement, which we can use in construction industry. So this topic is still being investigated. Again, if you are interested, please look at these, look at the website or the biomimicry web page. Finally, one example about wetlands and mangroves. So wetlands and mangroves are natural systems that are there, and they provide multiple benefits. One obvious benefit is they protect us against storm surges or water surges. So if you have a tropical storm or a hurricane or a tsunami, and if you have wetlands that are protecting you from sea, they will act as buffer for water surges. But they also serve another very important purpose, that is of purifying water. So it has been documented that many wetlands and mangroves have plants that can take up heavy metals. and purify water naturally. Now this kind of a system is very desirable because you don't have to maintain it. It is the water purification is happening naturally. So can we adopt this? So the example that I'm giving is from IIT Bombay. So this is a particular constructed wetland that has been set up at IIT Bombay. So this is like it's a very small scale facility for research. It is set up by Professor Shyam Asolekar's group in the Department of Environmental Science and Engineering. So it's a swimming tank like structure, a smaller structure with a particular slope, with a slight slope, and they are actually growing plants in this structure. So the sewage water is introduced at one end, and because the slope it gradually goes from one end to the other, and as it goes slowly from one end to the other, the trees that are here take up the pollutant. So this obviously this is an experimental facility mainly for research, but you can potentially expand this to purify water naturally. So this is another example of biomimicry. And there are several other examples. The biomimicry website that I will show in the next video has lot of examples from various different domains. Some examples that I've listed here are Velcro, which is which is similar to gecko feet or inspired from gecko feet. If you work in optimization, you would have come across genetic algorithm, one of the methods to solve optimization problems. You can say that that method is actually adapted from nature, and therefore it's an example of biomimicry. Another very interesting example is mosquitoes. So when mosquitoes bite, we don't feel it. So when we feel the mosquito bite, it is when the mosquitoes are actually taking out blood from your body. So the bite itself is painless. So can we copy that to make pain-free injection needles? Another very relevant example in the Indian context is East Kolkata wetland, similar to the example that I showed on the previous slide. So these East Kolkata wetland have been traditionally very useful to provide fresh water to the city of Kolkata, and at the same time providing other resources like fish and so on, and it's all natural. So the key learning outcomes of this video are, first and foremost, the basic idea that we learned was that designs in nature are inherently sustainable because nature has been around for millions of years, and the concept of biomimicry is about adapting these ideas from nature to solve our design problems. Biomimicry has a very wide scope. It can be implemented in any discipline, and practicing biomimicry requires you to have some awareness about nature and biological processes. So you have to keep your eyes, ears, and your thinking process open. So in this video, I will continue the discussion on the topic of biomimicry. In the previous video, I introduced the concept of biomimicry and showed you several examples of how biomimicry has been adapted in engineering design problems. In this video, I will actually talk very briefly about the formal process or design methodology or design process to adapt biomimicry. So this material is taken from the biomimicry.org website, which is mentioned at the bottom. So it's a 6-step process. So biomimicry process, the process that has been designed or proposed by this particular Biomimicry Institute organization, is a 6-step process which starts from define, follows up with biologize, discover, abstract, emulate, and evaluate. So I will go through these steps briefly, defining the steps and explain that using the example of bioluminescence that I have covered in the previous module. So the first step is the step of define. So here the definition, what do we include in define? It says clearly articulate the impact you want your design to have in the world. That is the challenge you want to solve, and the criteria and constraints that will determine the success. So here you basically start with a problem that you have in mind. In some of the examples that I showed in the previous on the previous slide, you may think that it's a matter of chance that somebody who was working on the problem happened to come across a particular natural process or design, and that's how the connection was made. Now that might be true for some cases, but you cannot expect that to happen for many problems. So you have to have a formal process, and you always start with a problem statement or the challenge that you want to solve. So that is the first thing in the biomimicry process. And an example for the blue mussels and the formaldehyde free glue would be, so the define stage for that particular problem would be something like this: how can I develop a new wood adhesive that eliminates the use of formaldehyde and provides similar adhesion? So this is the original problem that you could have started with. That I know that there is a lot of consumption of wood adhesive in construction industry which uses formaldehyde, which is not good, but it is used because it has very desirable adhesion properties. So I want something that eliminates the use of formaldehyde and at the same time provides similar adhesion. So that is the define step. The second step, and it's a very critical step, and that is the step of biologizing something, or finding basically a natural system. Specifically, the step says analyze the essential functions and context your design solution must address. Reframe them in biological terms so that you can ask nature. So here, you have to, if you want a biomimicry based solution, you have to ask, okay, what is there in nature that has similar properties? So in particular example that we are looking at of formaldehyde free glue, the biologized step would be, how does nature enable adhesion between different types of surfaces? So if you solve this problem using conventional approach, with not the biomimicry approach, the conventional approach will say that, okay, formaldehyde is not desirable, it has some health problems, what is the other chemical that I can use? So that the focus will still be on chemical, using something that is man-made, some artificial chemical, what can replace formaldehyde? Now in biomimicry, you actually look at the natural phenomena. So how does nature enable adhesion between different types of surfaces? So that is where the method or process diverges from the conventional innovation process. The third is discoveries. Now this is where you need either strong awareness or familiarity with natural systems, or maybe you need someone, a biologist in your team. So this is the discovery phase, which is most critical. It says look for natural models, organisms or ecosystems that need to address the same functions and context as your design solution. Identify the strategies used that support their survival and success. So this is where you basically look at nature, okay, and try to find out, okay, I have this problem that I want to solve, I know what I need, what is there in nature which actually does something similar? So here, as I said, you yourself would have strong interest in natural systems or ecosystems, or maybe increasingly the way it is done in formal setting is you have a biologist or a naturalist in your team who has expertise in these things, and he or she can suggest what are similar examples where this kind of functions are available. So in case of, the basic idea is, you basically go around, observe, keep natural journals, keep eyes, ears and mind open. So in case of the blue mussels example, the discovery step was when the person found out that, okay, there are these creatures called blue mussels which are able to stick to the rough surface very well. So that is something he observed in nature, which has similar functions of sticking in a very rough environment, and that was the discovery that he made. So that is the third step of the biomimicry process. The fourth step is that of abstraction or abstract, and it says carefully study the essential features or mechanisms that make the biological strategies successful. restate them in non-biological terms as design strategies. So this is where you actually study the natural system. So once you have identified, okay, these are the 2-3 things that have similar features, maybe you won't find only one solution. Maybe you will find multiple potential solutions, and you need to find out which is the best one. So that you will have to do in the abstraction phase. So basically study these natural systems very carefully. So in going back to the example of blue mussels, the once the scientist identified or saw that blue mussels are able to stick to the surface very well, he investigated those creatures and basically found that this particular amino acid dopa has a catcall functioner group which forms strong bond with the catcalls on adjacent molecules and so on. So this is basically the abstraction phase. We basically found out further details about how these things work in nature. What is the specific scientific thing that allows them to stick to the surfaces? So that is the fourth step, that is of abstraction. The fifth step is emulate. So look for patterns and relationships among the strategies you found and hone in on key lessons that should inform your solution. Develop design concepts based on these elements. So I have already mentioned in the past that biomimicry is not using exactly the same thing. It is mimicking. So that is, you adapt it for your problem. And that's what we mean by emulate. That is, you try to find something similar that you can do. Now in the example that we saw, the scientists figured out that soy protein has similar properties. It's not exactly the same, but it has similar properties. But he figured out that soy protein is an alternative to blue mussels, and it can be used to develop a process to manufacture such a glue at large scale. So that is the process of emulation, or emulating the natural or mimicking the natural phenomenon or process into something that you can scale up. And the final step is that of evaluation. So that is when you actually assess the design, assess the design concept for how well they meet the criteria and constraints of the design challenge and fit into Earth system. Consider the technical and business model feasibility, refine and revisit the previous steps as needed to produce a viable solution. So there is no guarantee that whatever you have come up with is going to be technologically, economically, or business wise feasible. It is quite possible that something that you have figured out is so difficult to do, or it's so expensive that it's not going to be scalable. It's also possible that something that you are trying to do will actually solve your problem but create another problem. That is again not a desirable thing. So the sixth step is when you actually do all these assessments, evaluate your problem, find out whether it is technologically feasible, scalable, whether you can develop a business model around it, because eventually we want to do it commercially or at a larger scale. So this includes things like technical and performance evaluation, LCA studies, business models, and so on. And as the statement says, you may have to revisit some of the earlier steps. So as I told you, at the beginning you may have 3 or 4 options that you have shortlisted, and maybe you'll have to revisit the second preference because something is not desirable in the first choice that you initially thought would be the best option. So this will be an iterative process. So you'll have to keep repeating it until you find a solution that works. So as I said, this material was taken from this particular website, and there are more details for every step. They have given additional information with examples. So I would strongly encourage you to go to that website. Now let me also talk a little bit about some of the challenges of biomimicry. I have given you a lot of examples of how exciting biomimicry it is, and how it can solve several problems. But it doesn't mean that biomimicry is able to solve all the problems. In fact, that is not true with any of the solution approaches that I will discuss. They by themselves cannot solve every sustainability related problem. So similarly, in biomimicry, there are some challenges that we need to address. The first challenge is that many natural processes are generally slow in nature. So uh, they take a lot of time. In fact, the reason we want to often go at high temperature, high pressures is because we want to speed up things. Because our demand rates are very high, and in order to produce at that rate, we need to go to higher temperatures, pressures, and so on. But natural processes typically are slow, and therefore there is this challenge of producing enough to meet our demand. One example is the coral reefs that I talked about, and how it can potentially be a replacement for cement. Now, the deposition rate of coral reefs is extremely slow, and the rate at which we are consuming cement at this point, there is no way you can meet that demand using that particular rate. So we'll have to figure out a way to make this faster without actually compromising the core principle or the core design principle. The second challenge is nature is complex and interconnected. So it shouldn't happen that in order to solve one problem, you are creating two or three other problems. So natural systems are extremely complex and interconnected. So you should always be careful about not causing unintended harm. And that's where systematic assessment methods like LCA will help. Third thing is scale. How do you scale it? Again, it's sort of related to the first point, but how do you scale and reach this level of production that is desirable? So one thing that is observed in nature is that nature does things at a very small scale. So everything is localized at small scales. There is no economy of scale, so to speak, that we often target in engineering designs. So can actually we go back to a philosophy where everything is localized or regionalized? And in fact, even from an economic standpoint, there is a philosophy that the economic approach that we are using right now, where everything is centralized, you have large scale production systems, and then the material is distributed all over the world, is actually not very good. Yes, as far as the manufacturing is concerned, it achieves the economy of scale, but there are a lot of other problems related to emissions, cost, and so on. So maybe small scale, regionalized or localized solution is a better way to go. And there is a philosophy even from economic standpoint, and that actually in some ways aligns with the whole principle of biomimicry, where things happen in a localized manner using local resources and so on. Um, so this is going to be a paradigm shift. If biomimicry has to be adapted at large scale, maybe we'll have to make a paradigm shift in the way we think about our economies. So these are some of the resources that are available. Much of the material that I have taken from much of the examples that I have discussed are taken from the Biomimicry Institute website, biomimicry.org. There is also a design challenge that they organize. So this is a young design challenge for different categories. They have a biomimicry based design competition. So that is something that you can find out more about. There is information about prior winners, so you can get a feel of what kind of solutions people come up with. There is also another website called asknature.org, which also has a lot of useful information. There is also a consulting firm called Biomimicry 3.8. So this is a private organization, and they do consulting to industries, but their speciality or uniqueness is that they do consulting purely based on biomimicry principles. So every solution that they will generate will be based on the concept of biomimicry. Now let me show you a little bit the website biomimicry.org. So this is the biomimicry.org website, and as you can see, it has a lot of resources. So there is basic information about what is biomimicry, so basic definition and so on. A lot of explanation. There is a detailed video about from the president of the Biomimicry Institute, and additionally there is information. There are biomimicry examples. Some of the examples that I have taken are from this particular uh, for example, this architecture. Let me go into this. So learning from termites how to create sustainable buildings. So this is the example that I had told about, and there is more information as I told you. So let's go and find out what kind of information is available there. So this is additional information about how these molds work. I told you that it is being currently investigated. They are CFD based studies. This is the Eastgate Center, the example that I gave, and some CFD modeling and so on. So there is a lot of information available, and there is also information about some of the uh, uh, academic literature that has been generated. So there are journal articles based on solar powered ventilation of African termite molds and so on. So, and this is available for all the examples. So this is a very exhaustive website, a lot of information available, and you can find more about these examples. So this is the transportation example that I talked about, the bullet train and the kingfisher bird. So again, you can go to this Ask Nature website where more information is provided. So this is what I've talked about. You know, if you have a particular shape, then there is very little disturbance generated in water. So I'll encourage you to explore this. This is the youth design challenge that I mentioned about. So there is information about the every year's challenge winners. There is information about more discussion about what kind of solutions they have generated. And also the biomimicry toolbox, which is the design approach that I talked about. The biomimicry process. So this is the figure that I explained stepwise, and there is more information available. So I'll encourage you to look at this website in a lot of detail. There is a lot of information available. So the important learning outcomes from this module are: first, moving on from the examples of biomimicry, I explained the formal methodology for practicing biomimicry. It's a 6-step process. The methodology can be followed to generate solutions, but you also need to know that acknowledge that biomimicry also has some challenges that need to be addressed. So it's not going to solve all the problems, and further research is necessary. Thank you.